The challenge for us as an airline and as an industry is to decouple the growth from emissions growth. And what I mean by decoupling is where we get to a point where we are growing the business and we are growing the industry, but that the emissions are coming down at the same time.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying. On this show, I speak with aviation leaders, innovators, and policymakers driving real action, separating the signal from the noise to spotlight what's truly moving the industry forward. The same focus that is at the heart of our new book, Sustainability in the Air, Volume 2. In it, Dirk Singer and I take stock of how far the industry has come and how far we still need to go. With the global carbon budget potentially running out by 2032, the clock is ticking. But the most promising solutions today aren't just environmentally sound, they are economically superior as well. From SAF and contrail mitigation to direct air capture, the book offers a practical roadmap for aviation's journey to net zero. Get your copy today. Link in the show notes. My guest today is Lahiru Ranasinghe, Director of Sustainability at easyJet, one of Europe's largest low-cost airlines. Lahiru leads the airline's transition from strategy to execution, embedding sustainability across operations while navigating one of the most tightly regulated aviation markets in the world. In this conversation, we explore how easyJet is balancing growth with emissions reduction, why scaling SAF remains a structural challenge, and what it really takes to translate a net zero roadmap into real-world results. Lahiru, it is fantastic to have you on the podcast. We last had someone from easyJet over 3 years ago. Lots has changed. You have assumed this role, leading sustainability at easyJet. What does it take? What is it like? What do you do?
What do I do? Well, very simply speaking, I've got two ambitions, or the team has two ambitions, and that is one, to make easyJet more sustainable, and to play our part in making the industry more sustainable in the long run. So how do we actually go about doing that? So there are three things that we do as a team. So we own the sustainability strategy. So we build up the plan. We build out the blueprint as to how we tackle this really, really thorny, challenging issue of getting from where we are today to a position where we've got to net zero as an airline and as an industry. But, a strategy on its own is not what the paper is written on. You have to deliver. And I think between the last time you spoke to easyJet and now, it's really gone from building the strategy to focusing on delivery. And that takes all sorts of different forms. So anything that's very long term, so whether it be SAF strategies, whether it be hydrogen, direct air removals, novel technologies, my team will generally look after that, and they'll look after the long term. Partnerships, and a lot of what we do on top of that is actually embedding sustainability within the business, so that the business is set up to deliver against this roadmap and deliver against the strategy that we have put together. But it's not just there. There are actually some parts of the business, flight operations, for example, that are very advanced in terms of their approach to sustainability initiatives and driving and tracking them. So in that case, what we do is just closing the loop. It's making sure that there's a closed loop system at easyJet that keeps all these things going. And last but not least is the part that every sustainability professional loves to hate, the reporting side of things.
Right. Let me step aside a little before diving in here. You have a tremendous amount of experience, from studying aeronautical engineering to working in corporate capacities at both British Airways and Virgin Atlantic. And now you are at an LCC, a fast-growing low-cost airline, leading sustainability. What's different from working at a large airline like BA or even version, I would say,
Mhm.
a long haul carrier, wide bodies compared to easyJet. Let's go point to point. Let's be scrappy. Let's try new things.
It's probably less dissimilar than you'd think. At the end of the day, easyJet is also a massive airline, and we cover the whole of Europe. I think what has changed, of course, is the fact that I work in a sustainability role, whereas my past has been very much in commercial and strategic jobs, and they've all set me up really well. I think to do what I do, because what has changed with sustainability is that it has gone mainstream. It has become more of a strategic function as opposed to being a compliance and reporting function that it would have been many years ago. And what I bring to the table with this is I've worked in enough airlines and been close enough to the technology that I have a working understanding of how things work. I've got a working understanding of how the aircraft and the engines work and how they're manufactured, etc. Um, Not to pretend for a second that I'm a fully fledged engineer, but I can have the conversations with those who are much smarter than me. And I've been in airlines enough to have a good idea of how they function and, crucially, how decisions are made. So all of that has given me different perspectives and different levels of understanding of how different airlines work. And what that's helping me to do now is that's helping me to bring sustainability into the business, because ultimately it's not a case that sustainability stands alone by itself. My job really is weaving sustainability into how the business operates and trying to deliver business benefits as well through doing this. So all of it comes together in a bit of a package. But I think if you took my whole journey over the last decade and a half or so, when I started working, I had no inkling that this is the path that I would take. Kind of gone from step to step, doing the next right thing as far as I could see it.
Mhm. I'm curious though, before we get into the how you're
Mm.
becoming more sustainable, can an airline be sustainable? Today there are 29,000 aircraft in the air. There'll be 47,000 by 2040 according to Boeing's latest outlook report, and all of them will be flying today's technology, which is jet engines. So you need jet fuel
Mm.
in there, some sort of, right? Or a substitute. But my understanding is that SAF use today is 1%, and we are far away from 100% SAF certification or use. Can flying be sustainable fundamentally?
I think we have to make flying more sustainable, and I'm saying more sustainable because, and that's not just about flying. That's about anything that we do. Getting to 100% sustainability right across absolutely everything is it's an ideological view, but it's not realistic. And what I mean by this is that even if we were running on zero emissions, we still would have aircraft, seats, infrastructure, all of that. But what we do have to do is we have to preserve our license to operate and our license to grow. So this is really about how we shift this industry not to be different to the world, but to keep up with the world. And it's not easy. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, because it's remarkably difficult to get a large aircraft into the air, let alone any kind of distance, without fossil fuels at the moment. Um, and it is something that we can't switch off overnight. We don't have a transition that means you switch from, for example, fossil fuel to electric. But what we do have is we do know that we have several pathways, each of which is complementary and chips away at that impact that we have. And I'm focusing very much on the emissions because naturally that's more than 90% of the impact. But we have all these pathways, and it is really now about transitioning them and scaling them up. You mentioned the fact about SAF use at 1%. SAF is there. SAF is there, and we know that it works. It's now about scaling up the production to meet the demands over time, so that we can ramp that up and bring our impact down.
Right. So let's get into. I'm with you. I think the responsibility is there. Actually, before we get into the how, why do you think the responsibility lies with you as easyJet or as an airline in the UK or as an airline in the developed world? Why not say, you know what, we'll wait for others to do their bit and we'll just adopt when the technology is ready? Why are you sticking your neck out?
Well, it's not really just our responsibility, it's everybody's collective responsibility to do this, and we have to, and we have to play our part in it. And like I said, this is not just because it's the right thing to do, which it absolutely is, but it's also something that we have to have the foresight to recognize that the long-term sustainability of this airline, easyJet is 30 years old. For easyJet to be around for another 30 years, we need to understand how we drive this transition and play a part in it. And you mentioned, why do we push this? Why do we need to take a role in it as a low-cost carrier? Well, we're a European low-cost carrier, and in Europe we have the most tightly regulated or tightly environmentally regulated market in the world, and so we have to make sure that that we're on top of our game. And the reason why the European market is tightly regulated is because that's a reflection of how societal sentiment has changed over the years. And we see this even within our network. We see that different countries in Europe also have different levels of engagement, which then transpire in different levels of regulation and investor interest, etc. So this is about us making sure that we maintain a structural position and that we have the ability to keep operating, keep growing, and keep competing in this tightly regulated but also highly competitive marketplace.
I love that you say that, you've to be able to operate 30 years from now, to have a sustainable business, you have to have a sustainability strategy, and that's why you're critical to the overall business. Now let's get into the weeds, the actual how. You said the last time 3 years ago when we had, I think, Jane Ashton from easyJet on the podcast, she talked about the strategy. You spent the last 3 years executing on it. How has that gone?
As with any strategy, there's a good, the bad, and the ugly around it. So for starters, the way we treat this is you can take the strategy almost as trimming the aircraft, in the sense of we set it in 2022, but we trim it, not cut it, but trim in the sense of the tailplane on an annual basis to make sure that what we have in it is the best representation of reality, or the best representation of the expected reality that we have at that moment in time. And the obvious example here is that we update it with the fleet plan. So we know how many aircraft are meant to be delivered over the next few years, what types, so it gets updated on an annual basis. Now, in terms of, before going into what's actually going well and going badly, I should probably talk about what's in it. And what we have is, we first have the efficiencies. So that's fleet renewal, which for us is with Airbus NEO aircraft. There's operational efficiencies, which is defined as the efficiencies that we have in our control. So this is where flight operations in easyJet is really top notch. And then there's airspace modernization. So that's more ANSPs, and that is driving the efficiencies in the skies in which all of us operate. There's then the fuel side of things. So replacing fossil fuel with sustainable aviation fuel, and then eventually with hydrogen in the long term. Last but not least, as with any kind of aviation roadmap, we are not going to get to zero emissions by 2050 as an industry. So we will have a reliance on carbon removals, greenhouse gas removals to address that. Right. So I've talked about what I've given you the whistle-stop tour of what is in it. Let me talk about what's going well and what the challenges are. So fleet renewal has been going well, and for us, we still have a large fleet of A319s, and we're replacing those aircraft with
the baby bus.
The baby buses. Yes, we do. It's
one less exit door.
Sorry,
one less exit door, right?
We have two because we've got high density config. Yeah, but it's quite. We play the game with new recruits. Is it 319 or 20? 319 or 20 when the aircraft are in the hangar. But those aircraft are exiting the fleet, and what they're being replaced by is 320NEOs and 321NEOs. So to put this in context, the 319 and the 321NEO have roughly the same amount of absolute fuel burn, and the 321NEO has 79 seats more.
So on a per seat basis, it's much lesser carbon intensity.
Exactly. We're getting a lot of growth through gauge, and this gauge is being added very, very efficiently. So the fleet renewal aspect is going strongly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And on that, right, carbon intensity, I believe you have a 35%
Correct.
reduction target, SBTI verified as well.
Correct.
That's pretty strong. Is that all being addressed by fleet renewal?
No, not just by fleet renewal, but it is being addressed by what is available right now. So what we have in that, where we draw the line on that, is you've got the fleet renewal, you've got ops efficiencies, airspace, and SAF mandates. And I say mandates clearly because we have not predicated our roadmap on uplifting any SAF beyond what we are mandated to. If we can make the case to, of course we will, but it's not something that we can hang our hat on at the moment. So in terms of that 35%, I'll come back to what's going well, but essentially we built this bottom up. So when we built the roadmap, it wasn't a case of here's the SBTI pathway, how do we hit it? We built it bottom up in terms of here are the fleet retirement profiles and the growth profiles. Here is the fleet plan. Here's our order book. How do you build that up? What are we achieving in terms of operational efficiencies right now? How far can we extend them into the future? And in terms of airspace modernization, what is a realistic target and what is a realistic time frame in which to achieve that? So for us, we've got that 10% the 10% target, but to be achieved by 2035. And of course, on top of that, you've got the SAF mandates for the UK and the EU. Now, what we use the SBTI pathway for is we used it as a translator. So we essentially built and said, this is what happens to our roadmap if we pull the levers that are available to us in a way that is stretching but appropriate. So we're not doing something, we're not pushing something that we don't think we can do. And then we overlaid the SBTI pathway as that translator. I say translator because if you say you need to keep your temperature profile on the well below 2 degrees pathway, that's Dutch to me. You have no idea what that means in terms of business. The beauty of the SBTI pathway is that it then converts that temperature requirement or that temperature pathway into a language that we can understand, i.e. the CO2 intensity. And look, for transparency, we set the roadmap and had it validated almost 4 years ago now, and that is against the well below 2 degrees pathway. But that is how we used it. In terms of actually checking that we're not being silly about this, that we're being credible about it. When we did this in the first place, we actually did 26 rounds of review with external parties.
Oh, wow.
And this was, we had NGOs, scientists, the policy world, we had associations, our technical partners. So we really kicked the tires on it and refined it as much as we could so that what we were starting off from was a robust position. Going back to what you asked now, how it's going. So the fleet renewal is going well. The operational efficiencies are going extremely well for us in terms of we are over delivering versus what we had initially planned for. And that's not something I can take any credit for. That is very much driven by flight operations. What is looking more challenging is the airspace modernization side of things, in the sense that not that the target is challenging, but in terms of getting moving towards it, that has not been happening as fast as we would have liked. But to be clear, with airspace modernization as well, the general link that's made is the moment someone says that, the inference is that you're talking single European sky, and that tends to trigger an emotional reaction. What we have done is we have done an in-depth analysis of our own operations, or every single flight over a period of a year or 2 years. And we have identified the hotspots. So it's not a point where we're saying, okay, you have this utopian open skies and you get 10% improvement. We have identified where there are hotspots that are driving disproportionate levels of disproportionate levels of inefficiency. And actually, the number that we have come up with in terms of the network-wide impact is pretty close to that 10% improvement that CESAR
Right.
has got in place.
Give me an example of this hotspot. Would this be, oh, let's say, just west of Ireland or over the English Channel, where there are lots of planes taking off or landing or circling over Gatwick or Heathrow? Is that what a hotspot looks like?
Exactly. So for example, the southeast of England is a hotspot because of the density of flying in this area. But without calling out any specific airports, what we'd be able to do is now, rather than go and say, okay, you need to modernize airspace, you need to make things better. It's a case of, okay, departure profiles into this airport are having this level of inefficiency because of an indirect routing, let's say. So what can we do? Maybe not to completely switch it off even, but to improve that efficiency. What do we do to improve that efficiency by 50%,
right,
rather than switching it off?
So you work directly with an airport or a group of airports to improve the departure arrival profile.
So that is what we intend to do. So it's early days yet. We wanted to make sure we had the data, and we have been working very closely with the UK, especially in terms of the work ongoing. But we're trying to take that collaborative approach and say, look, here's where we see the issues. What are the solutions? How can we work to make that happen? So there are there are risks to the targets, but of course this is why it's meant to be a stretching target. That's not something that we can just achieve just like that. What's helping is the over delivery of the operational efficiencies.
Right. So if you combine both the operational efficiencies and the carbon intensity roadmap that you're working on, is that still enough to compensate for the growth that easyJet is experiencing in your overall emissions? How do you balance growth with the actual sustainability goals?
Yeah. So that's a really challenging one to manage, because, and when we talk about growth, I think you have to put the context around it, because it's not that airlines are growing for the sake of it. Airlines are growing because there is demand. Demand is growing for starters, but also we operate within the limits of a box that has been drawn for us. And the box that I'm talking about here is the financial system and the markets, in the sense of any company is expected to grow from an investor's perspective, from an economic perspective. So that is almost a prerequisite or requirement for any successful organization. The challenge for us as an airline and as an industry is to decouple the growth from emissions growth. And what I mean by decoupling is where we get to a point where we are growing the business and we are growing the industry, but that the emissions are coming down at the same time. And this is the argument that the UK government is really using and doubling down on when it comes to airport expansion. Now, it would be great for me to say, yeah, we're able to do that immediately. But once again, there is a transition. So before you get to that transition, before you get to the point where we're able to truly decouple, we will be at the point, we need to get to the point where we're able to grow without increasing our emissions.
Overall emissions.
Exactly. And before that is being able to grow, but without growing our emissions at fast. Right. So I'd love to be able to be here and say, straight away, we grow and everything goes down. We're going the right direction, but there are a few more steps before we get to a point where we're truly decoupling.
Right. So let's get to some of those steps, right? One of the biggest steps there is sustainable aviation fuels and SAF. And recently you've signed deals with Move as well as Atoba.
Yeah.
What's your SAF strategy? Is it to buy a lot of SAF? Is it to use book and claim? Is it to use consolidators like Atoba? What are your thoughts around SAF?
Very, very challenging and topical topic, naturally. And I know I'm using the word challenging a lot, but that's the reality of it. And I think we have to face up to it. So to give you a bit of context at first, the way we buy fuel and the way we refuel our aircraft, we have a completely outsourced fueling operation. And that's the same for most airlines. So we pay a refueler, and they will pump compliant fuel into our aircraft. And the SAF mandates are on the fuel. They're on the fuel supply. So they charge us for compliance, and they have to secure they have to secure the SAF. The baseline for us is that we continue with that model where we keep paying for the compliance and the fuel is provided. Now, what's getting challenging now is that it's very clear that the supply pipeline, the production pipeline for SAF, is far from certain, and that there are a lot of hiccups in terms of getting that supply up and running. To put it even more bluntly, it is not scaling up at the rate that we would need to see it scaling up to meet those levels of mandates. So this is putting us into a position where we do have to think outside of what's ordinary and what's comfortable for us, to be honest. And this is why we've been looking at other agreements, longer term agreements, and investigating things with Moeve and with Atoba. Now, the challenges that we have with this, and again, more context, is to get this production up and running. Everything that we're hearing is we need to get to final investment decision to be able to get these projects built. And what you need for that final investment decision is you need long-term offtakes. So you could look at that and say, okay, simple. So off you go. Why doesn't everyone sign long-term offtakes, and that solves the problem? Again, to put the context around it, we, as I said, we don't have any of our refueling infrastructure or anything for starters. So if we signed a long-term offtake, operationally, we are unable to do anything with that fuel once it leaves the factory gates. We can't blend it, we can't transport it, we can't refuel it. We're also, as a low-cost carrier especially, we're a high-volume, low-margin industry. So our profit margin last financial year was £6 per seat. So we're working on...
And what's that in percentage terms?
In percentage terms, that's getting around 10%. But essentially, that's by carrying. We made 600 million pounds by carrying 100 million passengers,
right.
And it's quite easy to erode that that profit margin if you're not careful. And the reason I'm saying this is because we have a situation where there's this first mover disadvantage that people will talk about a lot when it comes to SAF, or the risk of the first mover disadvantage, in the sense that if you lock in too early and then you get those who do the wait and see, lock in at lower prices later on, it's that relative cost difference that makes things scary, not just for us, but for all of the airlines.
Yeah, because SAF procurement, in my experience, now 18 years in the industry, is to work a lot with aircraft manufacturers. And when a Boeing or an Airbus introduces a new aircraft, the airlines ordering the first 10 get it the cheapest. The airlines ordering, body number 100 to 110 get it for a higher price.
Yeah.
Whereas in SAF is the other way around, where you go in early, you might get price X, and as the SAF startup scales up, their costs go down. They're able to offer lower cost SAF to your competitors.
Yeah.
So, what's the incentive here for any airline to move first?
That's exactly the challenge that we're being faced with. Is that the natural conditions that have been created, well, not natural, artificial conditions that have been created, is where there is the advantage is in the second mover. It's in the wait, and it creates a wait and see mentality, which of course then is a problem if someone needs to move first. Now, where I'm going to come to is with Atoba, because what we've signed with Atoba, they're a startup, and they've taken quite a novel approach to trying to address this challenge, because what they're doing is they're acting as an aggregator, so that what you're buying from them is an indexed cost of SAF. So you're able
it's like a REIT, like a real estate investment trust. That's an index or an ETF.
It's like an ETF, yeah, exactly, where you have access to a diversified portfolio as a standard, and therefore and that diversification changes over time as more plants come online. So that does help to address some of that first mover risk. It addresses that concentrated risk. And when we've signed the MOU with them, it was not just with them, it was a tripartite with WFS, because of course we need somebody with the capability to blend and distribute that fuel. So that's where we're looking out, where we're looking outside of our tried and tested to try and to try and get a handle on this rapidly evolving situation.
What about different SAF pathways, biosaf versus alcohol to jet versus e-fuels? How do you decide what to buy, how much to buy, whether to even look at one technology or the other or not?
Well, we're pretty agnostic as to the pathways and so on, but ultimately we have to meet the mandates. So within the mandates, we will be, we're trying to get hold of compliant fuel at the lowest cost, which is ultimately what it'll come down to.
Can you tell me a little about your partnership with Airbus? I thought that was very innovative, where Airbus is the Scope 3 partner, easyJet is the Scope 1, and you're carrying SAF, I believe, out of Toulouse or Hamburg?
So we've been carrying it out of Toulouse, and Airbus is their partner with whom we've got a very comprehensive sustainability relationship. So what we've been trying there is to see, okay, we're going to abide by the mandates, but is there a way for us to pick up more than the mandated amounts by creating this corporate SAF product? So Airbus, they're a big customer of ours, especially on the Bristol Toulouse route. We're linking two of their homes, so they essentially give us an order for X tons of SAF. We go to our suppliers and we get the best price that we can and share the cost with them. We take the Scope 1 benefit. They take the Scope 3.
So these are physical drops being put under the wing in Toulouse.
Correct. This is physical SAF, and we have done it in Toulouse so far, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in Toulouse. We can go to the whole market, but it is still physical SAF that gets delivered.
Are you seeking to explore more such Scope 3 partnerships where a corporate partner takes care of a bit or most of the green premium?
We have been talking to a lot of customers about this, because it's also something that it's something that is attractive to the corporate and to the corporate customers. I think what we have found is that there are differing levels of maturity. Of course, Airbus being Airbus and SAF being such a big part of their business, they have a huge amount of maturity. They understand it. And they know all the detail. It's much more of a journey to bring anyone who is not as familiar with it on. And we have definitely seen a difference in outlook and a bit of a difference in the conversations that we've been having over the last year, because the geopolitical situation in which we're operating as well, that has put more pressure on the sustainability activities of companies, corporates worldwide. So we're navigating that period. But once again, this is where the sustainability team or the sustainability function, it operates a little bit like almost like a startup within the company, where we will try different things as well. Some will work on the first shots, some will need some tweaking, some will fail. But we'll keep doing this and keep trying to identify how we can make sustainability benefit the business. And this was really at the heart of it.
Right. We've also seen a number of European airlines invest in SAF companies. Is that an approach that is appealing to easyJet as well, or do you foresee yourself as primarily a customer of SAF?
I mean, we are primarily a customer, and once again, the baseline that we need to get to is where not the baseline. We need to eventually get to the baseline where SAF is there and we're paying, and we go back to the fuel supply model. Because bear in mind, we're a big airline. Most airlines don't have the capability to invest directly.
Right.
But we also recognize that this is a unique set of conditions. This is a very different and tricky kind of area to navigate in this transition. So we are open to everything and we are investigating everything. I'm going to be deliberately cagey here and say that we are not, we're not going to say yes or no to anything, but we have our eyes and ears open to try and figure things out.
What about the customer side? We've seen a number of airlines offer SAF purchasing in the booking path. when they're booking a flight. We have seen airlines like KLM include SAF in the price of the ticket. I believe it's from Hamburg to Amsterdam and Amsterdam to London City Airport. Have you tried selling SAF directly to customers? If yes, what's the take-up been, and if no, why not?
No, we haven't done that. We haven't done that yet. Beyond with the Airbus agreement, what Airbus customers see is they do see the SAF as part of their flight.
The corporate customers.
Yes, the corporate customers. That is, in terms of offering it directly to our normal customer or the majority of our customers, it's not something that we have done as yet because it's not something that we see a pull for. And you have to also look at the different customer bases between a low-cost carrier and your full-service carriers like a KLM, in the sense that we typically have a much, much higher proportion of very infrequent travelers. So this is people who are traveling maybe once a year or once every 2 years. And this level of infrequent travel is not enough for a customer to be able to engage in a meaningful way with with something as complicated as sustainability and SAF in their flight. So at some point that may change, and you'd anticipate that over time as sustainability becomes more and more obvious and necessary, that we move to that point. But I think we're still a distance from being there as yet.
That's a fair answer. I remember years ago listening to the CEO of Banyan Tea Resorts, and one of the questions he was asked was, "Why don't you have a loyalty program?" And he said, "Well, it's very complex, and most people come to my hotel for their honeymoon once in a lifetime. They go to Maldives, they go to Bali, and that's it. They'll never come again. So I don't need a loyalty program. I'll invest the same amount in ensuring it's a better experience for them." So I hear you on the frequency bit.
That's a good parallel.
Airbus partnership is very impressive, but the other partnership I'm very impressed by is the one that you're working on with Rolls Royce here in the UK. Tell us a little about how that's progressed. Have you hit any challenges? How's the partnership been?
I mean, it's something that's proving and demonstrating a novel technology. So there are always going to be challenges and road and speed bumps along the way.
And the novel technology is hydrogen powered engine.
Correct. It's hydrogen powered gas turbine engine, because ultimately what we need and the Royal, not just easyJet but the industry, is to be able to power narrow bodies with hydrogen fuel, and for that you need an engine that's able to generate 30,000 pounds of thrust plus, and this is where the gas turbine really comes into its own. In terms of our partnership, we had a very clear objective of that partnership and the investment that we've made, which was we want to be able to help Rolls Royce to take this technology to the point where it is proven that they can generate that power in a fully hydrogen, completely fossil fuel free engine. And that's been, like I said, it's research and development. So there's a huge amount of learning along the way. Some things work first time, some things need a lot of refinement. But we are at a point where the engine has been completed. The engine has gone through its testing program at the NASA site in Stennis, and we have successfully proven what we set out to do. And this is a milestone in the journey of hydrogen. Now, of course, it still has a long way to go to get from this to a point where we're flying it on a narrow body aircraft. But this is a huge step on the path to that eventual outcome that we're trying to get to.
Talking about future aircraft and future concepts, you are also partnering with Jet Zero, the blending wing aircraft manufacturer. What's that relationship like?
So we've got a technology partnership with them. So essentially, what we're doing is we're offering our expertise to help them, and it's not just us. They've been very, very successful in terms of building up an airline working group. So a number of the world's major airlines. There are ourselves and a couple of other global low-cost carriers who are working with them on the low-cost model for the use of this aircraft. And what's really attractive about this is the fact that it's pretty much if you compare this with hydrogen is keeping the aircraft the same and changing the guts. This is changing the aircraft and keeping the guts the same. And it's been known forever and a day that a blended wing body is the most aerodynamically efficient shape, but it's always been constrained by a mix of manufacturing capability and control. We're at the point now where it is a realistic possibility. And what the guys at Jet Zero have been doing is, they've been rethinking what can be done. And this aircraft is it's designed to deliver around a 50% aerodynamic efficiency saving versus a 767. So slightly older than what we operate, but still massively significant. And we think that this is exactly the kind of innovation that is needed to think outside of the box to help us to address this issue that we've got. Because imagine that kind of efficiency gain. That means that and from a low cost model perspective, that all means less fuel, less emissions, less of everything. So it's really exciting, and they've just raised another $175 million in funding. So they're going from strength to strength, and power to them.
Right. Thing that keeps coming up is around contrails and non-CO2 emissions.
Yeah.
Where does that fit in the entire puzzle for you?
So we think this is an important thing for us to get a handle on and to get ahead of as an industry. And the reason for this, I think it does provide us with an opportunity, especially in terms of navigational contrail avoidance, to try and address it and try and come up with a solution ourselves. So to be the solution makers and the rule makers, as opposed to rule takers, if we don't move things forward at pace. Now, there's still a lot to be done there. I think we're at a point where there is no debate as to the fact that on a global level, contrails are a problem. Contrails are warming on a global scale. We know theoretically, conceptually, what we can do about it, which is to fly over it, under it, or around it. And by it, I'm talking about the ISSRs, high supersaturated regions where persistent contrails form. But going from that scientific point to being able to put this into place operationally, that has a lot of steps to be reached. And broadly speaking, you need two things. You need the science to be reliable enough. And by that, what I mean is that you need to have predictive models that are reliable enough in their prediction of ISSRs, which can then feed into our flight planning systems and the flight planning processes in such a way that then we can make it happen operationally. Now, a crucial thing to point out here is the link with airspace modernization, because ultimately, when we talk about contrails, we're saying, okay, 5% of all flights cause 80% of global warming. But that is 100% of the flights passing through a certain block of 3D airspace at a given time. That is the system. So if you want a systems-wide approach, and I think you do need a systems-wide approach, because this is never going to be 100% accurate science. So you need to be able to manage the errors on a system level. That system is a block of airspace. So when it comes to airspace modernization and the future of airspace, it is really critical that contrail avoidance is a major part of that reform, because our view is that ANSPs, air navigation service providers, have the power to be able to enforce contrail avoidance, and we as airlines have the ability to optimize and execute on it. And there's a symbiosis in working like that.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little about regulatory frameworks. We've seen the revenue certainty mechanism here in the UK come about. We've seen Refuel EU in Europe, which I believe are the two primary regimes you have to comply with.
Yeah.
Are these a pain in the neck, or are these pushing you to go push harder?
It's a mix, because I think I think there's a lot of good about it, and there's also a lot of bad about it. And this is not pointing fingers, because we are trying to collectively navigate a situation we've never been in before. So what the mandates have successfully done is it has taken the business case out of the equation. It says thou shalt use SAF, so you have the certainty of demand from the fuel suppliers and through association from the aviation industry, from airlines. Where things have struggled is in terms of incentivizing production. So we're in this situation where we are ready as an industry to buy the SAF and to pay for it, recognizing that there is a premium that's associated with it, but the production is not scaling up at the rate that we'd need it. The revenue certainty mechanism and the STIP in Europe, they both have the right intention. From our perspective, we think the market intermediary that's being proposed through the STIP is the best solution we see at the moment, because it does it does diversify, and it creates this mechanism that allows that allows a price discovery and takes away some of those issues that we talked about earlier. The RCM is taking a different approach, naturally, in terms of, but once again, that's something that is seen by the producer side of things as a positive step towards getting things up and running. Exactly. What we are seeing a challenge with is that because now there are these clear initiatives that are in place, it is unfortunately also creating the wait and see mentality, because if you're a producer, it isn't really in your best interest to jump the gun if you know that there are going to be contracts signed potentially under a more favorable regime and a favorable set of circumstances. So once again, we're still waiting. We still find ourselves waiting to get to that launch point.
That's very interesting. Earlier this year, I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I heard the CEO of Total Energies from France say that, oh, we'll wait and watch how Refuel EU goes. Because what if, just like the car industry, the mandates change? I don't want to overproduce. So they're not moving a finger and producing SAF until they see more certainty. And I was quite disappointed to hear that personally, because I truly believe that the Refuel EU framework is one of the most certain. If you look at policy frameworks in places like the US, you'll see what certainty means and the difference, right? So I think there's significant policy certainty, both with revenue certainty mechanism as well as Refuel EU, and producers need to pull their weight now and not just rely upon startups to drive SAF supply up. You're right on that.
I think, it would be quite easy for me to sit here and point fingers at the producers, being an airline, and likewise they could probably do the same to me. But I think what we have to recognize is that we are all operating in an environment that is created for us in a way, and there are economically rational reasons as to why things aren't moving at the rate that they need to. I think taking the honest look at it then is, what are the market failures that need to be addressed to make this move? And again, it's not even a criticism of policymakers, because this is a new situation. We're navigating this, we're essentially all winging this really difficult period, this transition period together. And something that we saw that was positive was, again, I'm going back to it, but the STIP and the market intermediary, especially the notion of a pilot trial to make that work, because I think that is a really good example where there is a framework in place in terms of Refuel EU, but there's a recognition that more needs to be done to make it actually deliver in the way that it was intended. Now, I know that the STIP very much focuses on ESAF, but we think the market intermediary, of which, what Atoba is offering is a company that's offering a similar version of it, that is something that could help to unlock this. Because ultimately, going back to that first point, what everyone is saying is we need offtakes. in order to get the production up and running, whether it be Total or whether it be a startup, and those who could be or should be off taking, whether that be fuel suppliers or whether that be airlines, are in a position where it is quite difficult to make the rational case to do so. So hence, moving towards, and I wish I had pat an answer. This is exactly what you should do. But for example, the market intermediary is a really good step forward in trying to bridge those gaps that remain between the different parts of the value chain.
That is true. And I've seen this being done in Singapore as well, where the Singapore government has set up SAFCO to buy SAF from the local Neste plant to supply to Changi Airport. So all airlines benefit from it, right? But the SAFCO is being funded by a passenger levy, which is right now paltry, not something that will take passengers away from Singapore Changi Airport. But I think you're right. Market intermediaries do have a role, and let's see how this unfolds.
Yeah.
In the last few years, now just to close up, in the last few years, we've seen big announcements from airlines and big actions. I mean, Virgin Atlantic did the 100% biofuels, 100% SAF flight. We had British Airways and IAG double their SAF uptake from Heathrow. If you look at easyJet and look at from now till, let's say, 2030, what are some of the big things you are excited about from your perspective?
Ooh, big question. From our perspective, there'll be a few big milestones that we hit. So the completion of the Rolls Royce engine testing, that is going to be a big one, because that is way out of our comfort zone, and that's something where we have had a tangible impact on a step forward for the industry. The other big one in near terms is direct air carbon capture, because we were early off-taker from 1.5 Stratos plant, and that by the time this goes live, it should be very close to being online. Operational. Yes, and we'll be getting the first removals from that. And those are two big steps forward into technologies that are needed in the long run. Other things that are exciting, SAF, I'm not going to talk about it right now because we're in investigation phase, so it will be a bit premature. But I think we will have continued to keep chipping away at our emissions. We'll have continued with the fleet renewal. We'll have continued with pushing forwards on those operational efficiencies. And I do think that we'll have taken really concrete action in terms of helping to unlock airspace. And that's both on conventional fuel burn and emissions, but also we have been doing quite a lot of work with Siconia, with the EU, and with the likes of Google on contrail management trials. And I'm really excited to kind of venture into the unknown with both those two areas, because there's a lot to be gained, and a lot that we're doing behind the scenes in those spaces. So watch this space.
Lovely. I'm excited by what's to come. Now, let me turn the table around and ask you if you have any question for me.
Oh, let me see. So you've got a more global view of the world than we do in our in our European bubble. How do you see this panning out over the next 5 years on a global level, and to what extent have you seen changes especially in the last year?
Huge change in the last year, especially with the regime in the US changing, the incentives changing. Simple things. One airline that used to publish its annual sustainability report has renamed it to the difference report as opposed to the sustainability report. And it's not just about the naming. It's gone from sustainability to energy resilience. In America, there's a SAF producer that has trademarked SAF into, what was it?
Secure
American fuel. Thank you. Yeah. Right? So the terminology is definitely changing. There was initially a bit of panic, but I think if you look at the overall global picture, yes, America seems to be going in a certain way, but you and I know this is a long-term goal, a long-term play. And we see significant excitement in the Middle East, for example, airlines trying to run trials, trying to fund local feedstock producers. The coolest one I heard was date molasses to SAF.
Okay.
in the desert. So, coming up with really novel pathways, or coconut husk to SAF in the Philippines. So different regions are coming up with their own RF&BO compliant sometimes methodologies. Also, because sustainability is no longer in, let's say, North America, the only thing, that changes the incentives so that you actually have to be financially better and economically better option to survive and succeed. And I think that bodes well, once again, in the long term for the industry. The other thing we are seeing is, just when the US seems to be scaling back and there might be pessimism, other countries are stepping up. We see a huge incentive in Australia. We see the market intermediary in Singapore. We see mandates coming in from Japan to Thailand. I believe another big one coming up in India soon. So overall, things are moving forward potentially faster. And I think it is the European airlines that are leading the way on showing how things are done. And others can then adopt and learn from the likes of easyJet. So I'm very curious to see what comes out of the hydrogen engine experiment, for example, or what you're doing with Airbus. I think can be replicated in so many other places around the world as well. So I see this is a big train that continues to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think that's very consistent with how we see the world. Ultimately, you're going to have ebbs and flows. Things are going to have to change. Things are going to change as we go along, and we adapt to the situation. But the reality of it is that the science is very clear. The world is only going in one direction, which means that the requirement to make sure that we as an industry address our issues and make sure that we are able to be structurally sustainable, both environmentally and financially in the long run, that still remains.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the final part of this interview, as you must be familiar, is the rapid fire round, in which we get to know you, Lahiro, a little bit better. So, Lahiro, what's your favorite non-easyJet airline?
I'll have to say Sri Lankan Airlines because it feels like home.
Yeah, okay, good one. Favorite airport?
Favorite airport?
Yeah.
Luton.
Really?
Very easy to get in and out of.
Okay, on that, definitely, for sure. Favorite city?
London, I have to say.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Jurassic Park, from the time I was 7.
Wow, the original Jurassic Park.
Absolutely.
Okay. It was one of the first movies I watched when I moved to Singapore as a kid as well. So I remember that clearly.
Classic.
Yep. Favorite book?
Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami.
Good pick. Okay. What do you do in your free time?
My free time, I think, like you, I'm a girl dad. So I try to spend as much time as possible with my daughter and my wife. I think the thing that I really love is having people around, having family and friends around, doing a cook-up, having a drink and a laugh.
Very nice. What is something you'd like to learn?
I've got a bit of a problem where I want to learn everything and anything. So at the moment, things on my list are learning to speak Spanish, learning to play the guitar properly, and to do a handstand.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let's see which one of these comes first. Okay, I'm very curious.
I mean, one of them has a higher risk to my own longevity than the others.
Maybe it's not Spanish then. And finally, what's the best advice you've received?
So when I first became a dad, I was speaking to my boss at the time at Virgin Atlantic, a guy called David Hill, and he's got daughters as well. And I asked him about parenthood, and he said, "You know what? The best advice I can give is be the person who you'd want them to be," and that's really stuck with me. As a mantra for parenthood, but also bring it back to the professional side to kind of be the change that I want to see.
Very nice. What a fantastic note to end on. I shall take that to heart as well. And Lahiro, I'm so glad that we could finally do this in person on the boat.
Great to be here, Shashank. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simpliflying, that's simply with an I.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simplifying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simplifying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our Supervising Editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Meera Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Lihia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimen is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.